Her hand was cold when it closed around mine, like metal leapt out under a winter moon. Yet her grip was trembling, as though she feared I might vanish if she let go. I could feel the faint pulse beneath her pale, translucent skin, and the warmth of my own blood seemed to flow into her through that single point of contact. We were sitting on the edge of the cargo bay ramp, the stars spilling out before us like scattered diamonds. She was small, fragile-looking, but her presence made the air feel charged, heavy with some unspoken promise. I had only given her my fries earlier that day, half a crumpled paper tray of them, greasy and lukewarm, but now she clung to me as if I had given her the world. There was something unearthly in her wide, silver-flecked eyes, something that made the hum of the ship fade into silence. It wasn't just gratitude, it was possession, the kind that promised she would let nothing and no one harm me again. It began the moment we stepped back into the docking ring. The thin, shifting light from the orbital station's overhead panels washed over the crowd, revealing 1,000 different faces, cyborgs, insectoid, traders, and species I couldn't name, but her gaze scanned them all with the precision of a predator measuring threats. Her hand never left mine, her steps always half a second behind mine, perfectly in sync, as though she'd studied the way I moved and mirrored it. I could feel her eyes flick toward every being who came within arm's reach. When a lumbering security drone passed close, its steel carapace glinting, she shifted her weight, her muscles tensing, her other hand brushing the curve of something strapped beneath her robe. The moment it was gone, she relaxed again, but the motion left my skin prickling. People looked at her, then looked away, as if there was something in her expression that made their instincts flare in warning. A reptilian merchant with glassy, multifaceted eyes tried to wave me toward his booth, but her head turned, slow and deliberate, and whatever he saw in her stopped him mid-motion. The station's recycled air was warm and stale, yet there was a chill in the space between us and the rest of the crowd, like she had carved out a bubble where nothing unwanted could reach. I hadn't even asked her name yet. I didn't know her language, her species, or why an alien girl who looked like starlight frozen into flesh had decided I was hers to protect. All I knew was that since I'd given her my fries, every step I took was shadowed by a presence that seemed ready to kill for me. We had almost cleared the ring's central concourse when the air changed. I didn't hear anything at first, just felt it a shift, subtle but undeniable, like the moment before a lightning strike. Her grip on my hand tightened enough to make the bones press together. She slowed her pace, head tilting slightly, her gaze sweeping the crowd without a trace of panic, only calculation. I followed her line of sight and saw them, 3 figures, broad-shouldered, wrapped in dust-colored cloaks that blended with the station's dull walls. They weren't moving fast, but they were moving toward us, always keeping in our direction. No matter how the crowd shifted, the station's hum grew louder in my ears, the voices of merchants and travelers fading until all I could hear was the echo of my own heartbeat. She stopped walking entirely, pulling me just enough that we stood with a pillar between us and the nearest of the strangers. The light overhead caught in her silver-flecked eyes, and for a heartbeat they seemed to flare like molten metal. She whispered something too, sharp syllables in a language that felt heavy with thread end. The nearest stranger hesitated, mid-dash step. It was only a second, but it was enough. She guided me away, her movements smooth but firm, weaving through the crowd in a path I never would have found on my own. Every glance over my shoulder showed the cloaked figures still there, still closing the distance. I didn't know if they were after her, me, or both. But as her fingers curled tighter around mine, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. She wasn't just leading me away from danger. She was leading me somewhere she could fight without witnesses. The corridor she chose was narrow, lit by failing strips of pale blue light that flickered against rusted metal walls. It smelled faintly of ozone and coolant, the kind of place where station workers stored forgotten crates or smugglers made deals far from security patrols. Her pace slowed, not because she was tired, but because she no longer needed to hurry. The crowd noise was gone, replaced by the echo of our steps and the faint hum of machinery deep in the walls. I realized then she had led us here on purpose. Her hand slipped from mine, not gently, but like a weapon being drawn from a sheath. She stepped ahead of me, her small frame casting a long, sharp shadow in the dim light. The three cloaked figures entered the corridor behind us, fanning out just enough to block the exit. Their footsteps were slow, deliberate, the sound of hunters confident in the kill. One of them spoke in a deep, rough voice. Words I couldn't understand, but the tone was the same in any language. "You can't run anymore." She answered with a sound I'd never heard before, low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the air, as if her very bones were tuned to some alien frequency. The cloaked figures hesitated, and in that instant her robe shifted, revealing a glint of black and silver along her hip. She moved before I even knew the fight had begun. Her body was a blur, feet sliding across the floor without a sound, hands striking in precise, brutal arcs. A flash of light erupted from the object at her side, not quite a blade, not quite a gun, but something that sliced through the air with a hiss. One cloaked figure crumpled before they could even react. A second slammed against the wall with enough force to dent the metal. The third lunged, and for a heartbeat I thought they had her. But she twisted, their momentum carrying them past her, and a crack like bone snapping echoed through the corridor. The silence afterward was heavier than the fight itself. The flickering light caught on the faint shimmer of her skin, her chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. She didn't look at the bodies. She looked at me, as if to check I was unharmed. There was no victory in her expression, the quiet certainty of someone who had done exactly what they intended to do. She stepped closer, her cold hand finding mine again, and the contact sent a shiver through me. Without a word, she began leading me deeper into the station's shadowed underbelly. And in that moment, I understood something simple and terrifying whatever I had gotten myself into. She would kill anyone who tried to take me from her. We didn't speak. I'm not sure we could have. The sound of our footsteps filled the narrow passage, echoing off walls patched with mismatched plating, and each step took us deeper into a part of the station that felt abandoned to time. Somewhere, far above, engines throbbed in steady rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat that had nothing to do with the lives that crawled here in the dark. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but no one followed. The three cloaked figures were not just defeated, but erased from the moment. She had made sure of that. The light here was thin, fractured by broken fixtures and swaying cables. When it caught her at the right angle, I saw things I hadn't noticed. Before, slender seams along her forearms that pulsed faintly with pale light, like veins made of liquid crystal. Her eyes were not simply silver-flecked, they held microscopic rings that shifted and spun when she looked at me, adjusting focus in ways no human gaze could. She was not just a girl, she was a weapon wearing the shape of one. We turned into a low, circular chamber. The floor here was scattered with dust and a few pieces of long-dead machinery, their surfaces draped in webs of thin metallic fibers. She finally let go of my hand and stepped toward the center. Her fingers brushed over one of the cables hanging from the ceiling, and a spark of light traveled through it like a living thing. A moment later, a ripple of soft illumination swept across the chamber, revealing markings etched into the wall's jagged spirals and geometric lines that seemed to shimmer as if alive. She stood there in the glow, her face calm, but her hands trembled slightly as she touched the patterns. It wasn't fear, it was something heavier, older. I realized then this was not a random place she had chosen to hide. This chamber meant something to her, something tied to the strange gravity she carried in every movement. I opened my mouth to ask, but the sound that came first was not mine. From somewhere deep in the station's bones came a slow, resonant tone, like a chime struck in a cathedral buried miles underground. She froze, the light in her veins brightened, and for the first time I saw her expression shift from control to urgency. She turned to me, eyes locking onto mine, and spoke my name in perfect, unbroken human speech. Her voice was low, certain, and edged with command. She told me we had to move now because they would have felt the chime too, and they would not stop at 3. We were moving before the echo faded. She took my hand again, not in panic but with the grip of someone who knew every second mattered. The corridor ahead narrowed into a jagged tunnel lined with dangling conduits and rusted panels, and she slipped through them like water finding the quickest path downhill. My lungs burned as I kept pace, the recycled station air tasting faintly of metal and something sharper, like ozone after a storm. Behind us, faint at first, came the sound, soft at the start, then building into something like claws striking steel in perfect rhythm. It wasn't footsteps. It was faster, more deliberate, and the sound crawled under my skin. She didn't look back, didn't slow, but the light in her veins grew brighter with every beat of that unnatural cadence. I realized she could hear more than I could, maybe feel the vibrations through the walls. Whatever was behind us wasn't. Far we burst into a wider hall, and my eyes caught the faint glow of the concourse far ahead, but she veered sharply down a maintenance shaft instead. The ladder rungs were slick, the shaft itself reeking of coolant and stale air, but she descended without hesitation. I followed, the sounds behind us fading, replaced by something worse, silence. The kind of silence that meant the hunters had changed tactics. The shaft emptied into a cavernous space, its ceiling lost in shadow. Massive, cylindrical tanks loomed on all sides, their surfaces covered in frost and shimmering with slow, pulsing lights. Pipes ran between them like arteries, and mist curled along the floor where coolant leaked in thin streams. She led me along the edge of one tank, moving with deliberate care now, her head tilting every few steps as if tracking something I couldn't sense. When she stopped, it was sudden and absolute. I froze behind her. The mist shifted. From the darkness beyond the nearest tank, something emerged, thin, jointed in ways that made my mind instinctively recoil. Its surface looked wet, its limbs too long, and where a head should have been, there was only a smooth curve that caught the dim light like glass. No mouth, no eyes, just the faint impression of motion beneath its translucent surface, like shapes. Swimming in deep water, her grip left my hand. The light in her veins flared to white. For the first time since I'd met her, I felt something raw from her, not control, not calculated aggression, but rage. And though the thing in the mist took a single step forward, I could already tell it had made a mistake. The creature moved in a way my eyes couldn't follow, its limbs blurring between positions, the mist curling around it as though drawn to its shape. She didn't retreat. Instead, her stance shifted, one foot sliding back, her weight lowering just enough to root herself. The white light running through her veins spread into branching patterns across her neck and jaw, like frost racing across glass. The air between them thickened, the cold from the leaking coolant sinking into my bones. It struck first one long arm, snapping forward with impossible reach, the end splitting into 3 bladed points. She pivoted at the last instant, her hand snapping up to catch the limb just below the blades. The moment they touched, a crack of energy exploded through the air, lighting the mist in a flash of pale blue. The creature recoiled, the smell of scorched metal or maybe flesh rolling off it in waves. She pressed forward, each movement a blur of precision and brutality. Her weapon was in her hand again, unfolding in an instant into a curved arc of glowing material that hummed like a living thing. Every slash left streaks of light suspended in the air for half a second before fading, and every strike drove the creature back step by step. But it was fast, too fast, its limbs whipping out from impossible angles, forcing her to twist and weave in a dance that was as much survival as attack. Then one strike slipped past her guard. A blade point grazed her side, and the light beneath. Her skin flared violently before dimming. Her breath hitched barely audible, but enough to punch a spike of panic through me. Without thinking, I moved. My hand closed around a loose length of metal piping lying near the coolant pool, cold biting into my palm. I stepped forward, not to attack, just to make the thing look at me instead of her. It worked, though maybe not the way I intended. The creature's faceless head tilted toward me, the shifting shadows beneath its surface quickening. It took a single step in my direction. She was between us before it could take another, her weapon carving an upward arc so bright it left after images in my eyes. The strike cleaved through one of its arms, severing it in a spray of translucent fluid that steamed in the cold air. The thing staggered back, twisting in on itself, and then it was gone, slipping into the mist with a speed that made my stomach lurch. She didn't chase. She turned to me instead, her breath steadying, her gaze scanning me as though checking for wounds. When she saw the length of pipe still in my hand, her expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable approval. She stepped closer, pressed her cold palm briefly against my chest, and then took my hand again. We kept moving, leaving the mist and the tanks behind, but I knew the fight wasn't over. Whatever those things were, they weren't afraid of her. Not yet. We didn't stop until the coolant haze was far behind us, replaced by the dry, metallic air of an older maintenance level. The walls here were patched with layers of paint that had peeled into curling flakes, revealing older colors. Beneath, the lights buzzed overhead, weak and erratic, and the floor vibrated faintly under my boots. The deep hum of the station's power conduits somewhere far below. She finally released my hand, but stayed. Close enough that I could feel the cold radiating from her skin, even without touching her. Her eyes moved constantly, cataloging every shadow, every sound. I sat on a low step near a locked access door, letting my breath slow. She didn't sit. She stood a little ahead of me, as if her body could shield mine from whatever came next. It was then that I noticed the wound. The strike from the faceless creature hadn't just grazed hurt, had left a mark along her side. A narrow gash where the pale light inside her leaked in slow pulses. The glow bled into the air in faint threads, dissolving after a few inches. She didn't seem in pain, but her movements were sharper now, like she was holding herself rigid to keep the injury from worsening. Without thinking, I reached toward her. She didn't flinch, but her gaze flicked down to my hand, then back to my face, reading my intent. When my fingers brushed the edge of the wound, a cold shock ran up my arm, and the faint sound of that alien hum rippled in my bones. Her skin was smooth, too smooth, no texture, no pores, and yet there was a softness to it, as though she'd been shaped to appear fragile. She let me touch her for exactly 5 seconds before she took my wrist gently and lowered my hand. No anger, just a silent refusal to let me carry the weight of her injury. But something had changed in her expression. Less predator, more something else. A recognition, maybe. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with questions I didn't know how to ask. And when the deep chime came again, fainter, this time, but still resonating through the walls, she stepped closer, looking directly into my eyes. The silver rings in her gaze spun once, twice, then locked still. We had to move, but this time, I didn't need her to pull me along. I stood and followed without hesitation. The corridors narrowed as we moved outward, the walls losing their shine and giving way to bare pitted metal. The air smelled different, here less filtered, sharper, with the faint tang of vacuum clinging to every surface. Each bulkhead we passed through was older than the last, the seal mechanisms crusted with corrosion, warning lights long dead. The hum of the station's heart was faint now, replaced by the groaning of its bones under the stress of orbit. She led with a pace that was neither hurried nor casual, the stride of someone who knew the map by instinct. At one turn, she paused to press her hand to a control panel, and the light beneath her skin spilled into the surface, tracing ancient circuitry that responded with a reluctant click. The door slid open just enough for us to squeeze through. Beyond it, the temperature dropped sharply, and my breath fogged in front of me. The chamber beyond was vast, its curved walls lined with thick viewports clouded by ice. Through one, I saw the void black and endless, studded with the cruel clarity of distant stars. Pieces of debris drifted lazily past, remnants of ships and satellites whose stories had ended long before I was born. The floor was scattered with long-forgotten crates and machinery, most covered in frost. A few torn open by something that left ragged, inhuman marks. We moved between the shadows of half-collapsed support beams, our footsteps muffled by the thin frost on the metal deck. The air here felt thinner, the kind of thin that made your heart beat louder in your ears. And then I saw them faint lines carved into the wall, spiraling and branching in the same style as the chamber she had shown me earlier. But these were older, the grooves worn and shallow, as if countless years had scraped them away. She stopped before one of the carvings and rested her palm against it. The light in her veins answered, flowing into the shapes until the entire pattern glowed faintly against the dark metal. I felt something then, not sound, not sight, but a pressure, like the weight of an ocean resting above me. It was the same sensation I'd felt in the first chamber, but stronger, denser, like whatever it represented was closer here. Her head turned slightly, her gaze drifting to the viewport. I followed her eyes and froze. In the distance, beyond the drifting debris, a shape was moving long, segmented, gliding silently through the void. Even from here, I knew it wasn't a ship. Its movement was too fluid, too alive. As it shifted, the light of the stars caught on surfaces that rippled like liquid metal, and I realized it was looking at the station. Her hand left the wall. She took mine without a word, and for the first time since I'd met her, I could feel the tremor in her fingers. The shape in the void moved closer, its long segments undulating with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Each one was lined with faint pulsing lights, not random, but in patterns that seemed to shift and repeat, almost like language. My chest tightened as I realized the pattern wasn't just for show, was accelerating. The intervals shortening like a heartbeat quickening before a strike. The girl didn't move for several seconds. Her silver-ringed eyes locked on the thing. Beyond the viewport, her grip on my hand tightened until my knuckles ached. Then, without a sound, she pulled me deeper into the frost-covered chamber, weaving between collapsed beams and abandoned cargo. She didn't run, but every step was sharp and precise, her attention divided between moving me away from the glass and listening for something I couldn't hear. A deep vibration passed through the floor, rattling the frost off nearby crates. I turned my head just in time to see one of the viewport's istaver edges crack in a jagged line. The sound was small, but it carried an edge that made my stomach, not the thing outside, was pressing against the station. Testing it, she stopped, in front of a narrow access hatch, half hidden behind debris. Her palm pressed against the panel, and the light in her veins surged violently, spilling from her fingertips into the controls. The hatch opened with a hiss of stale air and the groan of old metal, revealing a cramped shaft lined with frost and dark cabling. She pushed me inside first, her cold hands guiding me down into the darkness. As I descended, the vibration in the floor grew into a slow, steady thump, like distant artillery. But this wasn't impact, it was something knocking, not with fists, but with the mass of its own body. I could feel it through the walls, a low, insistent rhythm that seemed to reach through my chest and pull at something deep in my bones. Halfway down, I glanced up at her. She was closing the hatch behind her, sealing us in darkness, and for a moment the only light was the faint white glow from the wound in her side. Her eyes caught mine, and even in the dimness, the silver rings in them spun once, twice, before locking again. It wasn't fear, it was focus. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Then from far above came the sound of tearing metal. The tearing was slow, deliberate, as though the thing outside was savoring the process. The sound traveled through the old steel around us like a scream stretched over miles. I could feel each vibration in my teeth, in my spine, in the marrow of my bones. She didn't flinch. She moved lower into the shaft, forcing me ahead of her, her hands guiding me with the same care one might give to a fragile package. The air pressure shifted. A dull, hollow pop echoed somewhere above, followed by a thin rush of wind. The breach had opened. The station's old bulkheads must have sealed behind it, or else we'd already be dead. But the air still felt different in a hungrier. We reached the bottom of the shaft and dropped into a maintenance bay that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Tools lay scattered on a long bench, their metal eaten through in places by corrosion. The floor was layered in dust so thick that each step left deep, crisp prints. She didn't pause to search for weapons or supplies. She knew something I didn't. A new sound joined the groaning of the stations, something skittering, light but fast, moving along the walls and ceiling. The girl turned toward the noise, the light in her veins brightening to the cold white it had been in the coolant. Mist. Her weapon unfolded from her hip in a smooth, fluid motion, its curved blade casting a thin, vibrating hum through the air. The first of them dropped from the ceiling, a smaller version of the faceless thing from before, but leaner, with limbs like razor wire. It landed without a sound and immediately lunged for me. I had no time to react, no room to run. She intercepted it mid-lep, her blade sweeping upward in an arc so precise it cut the creature in two before it even had the chance to strike. The pieces hit the floor and dissolved into a pool of steaming fluid. Then the rest came. They poured from the walls and ceiling in a tide of segmented limbs and shifting, translucent surfaces. The light from her veins flared into a blinding white. As she moved, her body weaving through the swarm in a series of strikes too fast for my eyes to follow. Each cut left a hiss of vapor and the sharp Thames of alien fluid in the air. But no matter how many fell, more came, their movements coordinated, intelligent. Herding us toward the far end of the bay, I grabbed a length of steel piping from the workbench, my pulse pounding, when one of the creatures slipped past her guard. I swung with everything I had, feeling the impact shudder through my arms. The creature staggered back, its surface rippling where I'd struck it. And in that brief opening she finished it with a downward strike that split it apart. We reached the far wall, backs almost against the cold steel. The swarm slowed, circling. Then the ceiling above us groaned, and through a jagged split in the metal, something vast began to push its way inside. The metal above us warped, groaning like the hull of a ship caught in a storm. Dust rained down in thin streams as the jagged tier widened and the thing outside began to force its way through. Segments the size of shuttlecraft slid into the bay, each one rippling with liquid metal sheen, studded with clusters of pulsing lights. The air filled with the deep, thrumming vibration I had felt earlier, no longer faint, but so strong it rattled my ribs. The smaller, faceless things froze in place. Their segmented limbs twitched, as though in anticipation, before they slowly withdrew, melting back into the shadows. Whatever was coming didn't need them to finish the job. The girl stepped in front of me, her weapon angled low, the light in her veins so bright now it painted the frost-covered walls in a pale glow. The wound along her side pulsed with the same rhythm as the lights on the thing above. A disturbing sync that made me wonder if it was deliberate. Then the head came through, or what I thought was a head. It wasn't a single shape, but a cluster of interlocking plates, each shifting and folding over the others like the petals of a steel flower. Beneath them was nothing solid, only a churning mass of the same translucent material as the smaller creatures, shapes moving within it like fish in deep water. The sight made my stomach twist, not because it was alien, but because it felt wrong, like something that shouldn't be seen in the world of living things. The girl didn't wait for it to fully enter. She moved with a speed I hadn't seen before, crossing the bay in less than a heartbeat, her weapon sweeping in a wide arc aimed at the base of the nearest segment. The impact sent a shockwave through the floor, a sharp crack splitting the air. But the creature didn't recoil, it simply absorbed the strike, the glow of its lights shifting to a hotter, faster pulse. A sound followed not from the thing's body, but inside my head, a low, layered tone, deep enough to rattle my skull, carrying no words. The lights overhead flickered, but not in the stuttering pattern of failing power. This was deliberate, a calculated dimming, as if the thing in the ceiling was pulling light into itself. Every shadow deepened, swallowing the edges of the bay, until the walls seemed to vanish into darkness. The floor vibrated in a slow, rising pulse, and the cold in the air turned sharp enough to burn. She didn't waste time. Her weapon folded in on itself with a hiss, collapsing into a compact shape that locked against her forearm. She grabbed my wrist hard and hauled me toward the far end of the bay. Her movements weren't hurried so much as urgent, precise, every step avoiding the widening cracks in the floor behind us. The thing shifted again, its fractured body curling downward. Segments unfolded like insect wings, revealing jagged ridges that clawed at the edges of reality itself. I could feel it trying to push into my mind again, not with words this time, but with images, flickers of endless black corridors, walls, lined with motionless figures, and something vast watching from far away. My lungs locked up, my chest tightening, but her grip tightened too, and the pressure broke like a snapped cable. We reached the far wall just as it began to split. Beyond it lay not another room, but a yawning tunnel that plunged down into the ship's inner structure. Heat surged up from below, the air tasting metallic and bitter. She shoved me toward it. "Jump," she said. The floor buckled behind us. Before I could think, I dove, hitting the sloped surface and sliding downward, sparks hissing from the walls as jagged debris scraped past. She landed beside me without a sound, her body low and ready, her eyes fixed ahead, above. The thing let out a sound like tearing metal and rushing wind all at once. Segments plunged after us, bending the tunnel's walls inward as it forced its way down. We slid into a chamber lit only by a faint red glow from somewhere below. The air here felt heavier, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. She moved immediately, scanning the walls, pressing her hand to certain points as if searching for something. The chamber shook violently. A section of the wall tore open as one of the creature's limbs punched through, the edges glowing with frost. Her head snapped toward me, eyes bright enough to burn. "No human should be awake after that strike," she said, her voice sharp, almost accusing. "It kills your kind. Always." "I guess I missed the memo," I said, though my voice cracked. She didn't smile. She just stared for a beat longer than felt comfortable, then slammed her hand against a panel I hadn't seen before. The floor beneath us split open, revealing a vertical shaft that seemed to plunge forever. "You can't be what you are," she said, stepping toward the edge. "But we'll find out why if we survive the next 5 minutes." And then she jumped. The sound of the creature forcing its way into the chamber, chasing us down. The shaft swallowed us whole. The walls were a blur of rusted metal, tangled conduits and flickering glyphs that flared as we passed, as though reacting to our presence. Air roared past my ears in a deafening rush, but the sound was broken by sharp, mechanical groans echoing from above. The thing was following, no diving after us. She rotated mid-fall, limbs moving with a grace that defied the chaos around us. Her forearm weapon unfolded again, blades glinting in the dim glow as she carved into the wall. Sparks erupted, and a cascade of glowing debris fell alongside us. She caught one protruding strut, swung herself around, and kicked hard into the wall. Panels burst open, revealing a series of embedded coils that pulsed with violet light. The heat from them struck my face like a furnace blast. "Hold on," she shouted, though her voice carried in a strange, resonant way, more vibration than sound. She slammed her palm against the coils. They reacted instantly, sending arcs of lightning lancing upward through the shaft. For a moment, the space above lit up like a thunderstorm trapped in a tunnel. The thing shrieked, the sound tearing straight through bone. But it didn't stop its descent. The arc light revealed its full shape for the first time. It wasn't just segmented, it was modular. Its body split and reformed in midair, sections, sliding around each other like pieces of some impossible puzzle. Each segment carried its own cluster of unblinking eyes. all locked on us. The girl's breathing had changed, faster, sharper, not fear, calculation. She pressed herself against the wall as if measuring the fall, then launched herself off it, and slammed into me mid-air. Her arm locked round my waist, the momentum spinning us toward a dark side tunnel barely visible in the chaos. We hit the entrance hard, scraping along jagged metal before tumbling into a maintenance corridor. Gravity here was weaker. Every step felt stretched, as if the ship's heart was pulling at us from far away. She was on her feet first, scanning the darkness ahead, her weapon shifting again into something heavier, a cannon-like form with a humming core. I pushed myself up, chest still heaving. That thing, it's after you, right? Not me. She didn't look at me. It was, until you survived the strike. The corridor behind us groaned, metal crumpling inward. The thing was forcing its way in. She turned, finally, eyes glinting in the dim light. Now it's after both of us. And then she fired. The recoil from her shot was like a shockwave slamming through the corridor. A spear of blue-white energy ripped into the thing as it forced its way inside. Segments peeled away from the main body under the blast, spinning and screeching as they slammed into the walls, embedding themselves like shrapnel. The air stank of scorched metal and something darker burned flesh that wasn't human, but the thing didn't stop. It reformed, the gaps closing with unnerving speed. Pieces of its broken segments liquefied into tendrils, weaving themselves back into the whole. Its many eyes fixed on us, unblinking, hungry. She stepped forward, planting herself between me. And it, weapon glowing hotter now, edges warping from the strain. "You need to run," she said, voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "I'm not leaving you," I said, though my knees felt weak, my hands shaking from the adrenaline. "You don't understand." Her gaze didn't leave the thing. "You're not prey anymore. She stopped, as if catching herself from revealing too much, then took a breath that shuddered. "It will follow you until you're gone from this place, or until it's destroyed, and I can't destroy it alone." The corridor shook violently, panels raining down from the ceiling. In the distance, alarms began to wail, a low, mournful sound that felt more like a dirge than a warning. The thing lunged, impossibly fast, the entire tunnel behind it collapsing in its wake. She moved even faster. One moment she was in front of me, the next she was inside the thing's leap, weapon shoved into its central core. Energy flared, blinding white, and the blast lifted both of them off their feet. The shockwave threw me against the far wall. Pain exploded along my side. But I forced myself up in time to see her half submerged in the creature's form, grabbing one of its writhing limbs and forcing it back into its own body. The thing convulsed violently, trying to tear her apart, but her grip never loosened. Light began to pour from the seams in its body, not the cold, artificial glow it had before, but something almost like sunlight, pure and golden. It grew brighter, brighter still, until the whole corridor was swallowed in it, and in that blinding moment, I heard her voice not with my ears, but deep in my skull. "When this is over, you will walk out of here alive. That is my promise." The light shattered. When my vision returned, the corridor was in ruins. The thing was gone. She was on her knees, weapon dissolved, skin marked with blackened burns that traced alien patterns. She looked at me, exhausted but smiling faintly. "It's not dead," she said, "but it won't touch you. Not while I'm here, somewhere." Deep in the wreckage, a low, wet clicking echoed. Far away, but getting closer. We weren't done yet.